Humankind is always in search of happiness that is far beyond its reach. What is the secret of happiness? Hello, everyone. Today, I am going to talk about William Wordsworth's poem, Lines Written in Early Spring, the third chapter of the 10th Standard English textbook. Before we start analyzing the poem, let's get to know the poet briefly. William Wordsworth was a romantic poet who lived and wrote in England during the latter half of the 18th century and the first half of the 19th century. He is known as a poet of nature. Nature has a very important role in his poetry. He believed that the company of nature gives joy to the human hearts, and he looked upon nature as having a healing influence on the sad hearts of human beings. He was the Poet Laureate of England in 1843. His famous works include Daffodils, Lucy Gray, and The Prelude, among many others. The poem that is prescribed for our study, Lines Written in Early Spring, is a poem that is largely concerned with nature. It is quite simple in form with 6 stanzas of 4 lines each. A 4-line stanza is called a quatrain. So this poem has 6 quatrains. 6 into 4 is 24. So 24 lines altogether. I'm now going to recite the poem. As I recite, I want you all to look at the screen and recite along with me. Are you all ready? Let's start. I heard 1,000 blended notes, while in a grove I sate reclined. In that sweet mood when pleasant thoughts bring sad thoughts to the mind. To her fair works did nature link the human soul that through me ran, and much it grieved my heart to think what man has made of man. Through primrose tufts, in that green bower, the periwinkle trailed its wreaths, and 'tis my faith that every flower enjoys the air it breathes. The birds around me hoped and played, their thoughts I cannot measure. But the least motion which they made, it seemed a thrill of pleasure. The budding twigs spread out their fan to catch the breezy air, and I must think, do all I can, that there was pleasure there. If this belief from heaven be sent, if such be nature's holy plan, have I not reason to lament what man has made of man? Now this is a poem which celebrates the harmony that exists in nature. In it we see the speaker relaxing under a grove and thinking deeply about the changes that the society around him has undergone. Grove is a small area of land with a group of trees. Very simply put, grove is a small forest. So this poem was written in the year 1798. During the time in which the poem was written, the French Revolution was raging through France, and this seems to have influenced Wordsworth's thoughts about humanity at large. Let's take a look at the first stanza of the poem. In this stanza, we find the speaker relaxing or reclining in a beautiful grove. He is sitting in a relaxed manner. How do we know he is seated? The word sate in the second line of the poem tells us that. Sate is the old-fashioned spelling for sat. So as he sits there, he is surrounded by the blended or the mixed notes of nature. These 1,000 blended notes that he heard from nature must have been the chirping of birds, the gurgling of stream, the rustling of the leaves, the sound of the wind, etc. So all these sounds join together and form one melodious song. Our speaker sits there and enjoys the sights and sounds around him. But even as he enjoys the scene and the sounds, his mind starts thinking dark thoughts about human beings. When he sees the coexistence and harmony in nature, he thinks about how much in contrast human beings are to nature. The perfection of nature pains the poet. It makes him think about the imperfections of mankind. Even as he is deeply pained by how man treats his fellow beings, he is aware of the beauty that surrounds him in the grove. Coming to the second stanza talks about how nature has connected or linked her fair works or good deeds to the speaker's soul. Nature is treated as a woman by the speaker here. A woman who makes decisions to link herself to the speaker's soul and to experience happiness. The close bond between man and nature can be seen in the first two lines of the second stanza. This thought about the close connection between man and nature leads the speaker to sadly think about what man has made of man. It grieved or pained him so much to think about the sad state of humanity. The speaker does seem to have a reason to grieve here, right? Even though we as human beings have made a lot of scientific and technological developments, when it comes to emotional and mental maturity, it is sad to notice that we haven't made much progress. We lead selfish lives and bring misery and pain on each other. By the way, in this poem, the word man is used in the general sense of a human being. The connection with nature in this poem is very clear. It is to show the close link between man and nature that Wordsworth has placed his speaker in the middle of nature. There is nobody with him as he sits in the grove except for the plants, trees, and animals that surround him. This is what we see in the third stanza, the beautiful sights around the speaker. Different types of plants and flowers coexist and lend beauty to their surroundings. Two flowers are specifically mentioned in the third stanza, the primrose and the periwinkle. Primrose is a wild plant with yellow flowers. Through the tufts or bunches of primrose flowers, the periwinkle has spread its wreaths. Periwinkle is a trailing or a spreading plant with 5-petaled blue flowers. A wreath means the arrangement of flowers in the shape of a circle. So sitting in the grove under the green bower is a shady leafy shelter. So sitting under the green bower, the speaker sees that the primrose flowers have mixed with the spreading periwinkle plants to form flower wreaths on the ground. Because the flowers and plants cannot speak for themselves, by looking at them, the speaker feels or hopes that each and every flower enjoys the air it breathes. In the fourth stanza, the speaker talks about some other beautiful sights. He describes the activities of the birds he sees around him. They are hopping and playing. Do you know what hopping is? Hopping is jumping. So looking at all these, the speaker says that he is unable to measure or understand what the birds were thinking about. But still he feels that even the slightest movement that they make is a testament to the happiness or joy that they have in them. Each and every movement of the birds seem to be an expression of their happiness to the speaker. In the fifth stanza, the speaker takes a closer look at the sights of nature around him to decide if they are really filled with happiness. Are they acting? He looks at them and he understands that they really are filled with joy. He looks at the budding twigs that spread out their leaves as if they are trying to touch or catch the breeze. Budding twigs are the small, thin branches of a tree. Watching all these sights, the speaker can only believe that there is happiness and joy in every element of nature. In the sixth and final stanza of the poem, the speaker asks whether, if it is true that nature is full of joy, he then has a good enough reason to be pained about what man has made of man. The speaker believes that the birds, plants, flowers, and all other beings of nature live in complete harmony with each other. So the speaker says that if this belief of his is sent from heaven, and if to live in harmony and unity is nature's divine or holy plan, then he has enough reason to lament or cry out, thinking of what man has done to man. In the world of nature in this poem, everything is right and perfect. But in the human world, everything has gone wrong. The reason why he feels sad looking at nature is because he can feel the contrast between the natural world and the world of human beings. The speaker somehow feels that as a representative of the human world, it is his responsibility to contemplate on the mistakes of humanity. That is why he asks, "Have I not reason to lament what man has made of man?" I hope you remember the question I asked you at the beginning of this video. What is the secret of happiness? The secret of happiness is to live in harmony with nature and with each other. Let's now quickly check if the poem has a rhyme scheme. Yes, the poem does have a rhyme scheme. It follows the ABAB rhyme scheme in each stanza. Let's take a minute here and learn how to identify the rhyme scheme of a poem. The rhyme scheme of a poem can be identified by observing the words at the end of each line. Take, for example, the first stanza of our poem, lines written in early spring. I heard 1,000 blended notes, while in a grove I sate reclined, in that sweet mood when pleasant thoughts bring sad thoughts to the mind. If you look at these lines, to be precise, the last words of each line, you will understand that the words have a type of similarity. What is that? The word notes in the first line and the word thoughts in the third line end with the same sound. And the word reclined in line 2 and mind in line 4 end with the same the sound. Such words that end with the same sound are called rhyming words. Now that we have learned to identify the rhyming words, let us see how to mark the rhyme scheme. We will assign the letter A to the end word notes of the first line. The word reclined in the second line does not rhyme with the last word in the first line. So we assign it a new letter, B. The end word thoughts in the third line rhymes with notes in the first line. So we assign it or give it the same letter that we gave it to notes, A. Mind in the fourth line rhymes with reclined in the second line. So the letter B is assigned to the word mind. In short, the rhyme scheme of the first stanza is AB, AB. You can see for yourselves if the rest of the poem follows the ABAB rhyme scheme. Let us now examine the figures of speech used in the poem. Before we identify the figures of speech in the poem, let us understand why they are used in poetry. Why are figures of speech used in poetry? Figures of speech, otherwise known as figurative language, is used to decorate language, to make language more beautiful. Just as people use ornaments to look more attractive, language makes use of figures of speech to become more appealing. In other words, figures of speech or figurative language is the ornaments that language makes use of. Some of the common figures of speech used in language are simile, metaphor, personification, hyperbole, onomatopoeia, rhetorical question, alliteration, etc. Let's see if the poem Lines Written in Early Spring has employed any of these. Look at the first line of the first stanza. I heard 1,000 blended notes.
Yes, the poet is sitting in a grove and he hears a lot of sounds. Quite natural when you're sitting somewhere out. But to hear 1,000 notes, well, that seems a little too much, right? Let's just substitute that 1,000 with a 10. I heard 10 blended notes. Does it have the same effect as the original line? Not at all, right? So it is for the purpose of producing that extra effect that the poet has used that 1,000 here. An exaggeration or overstatement. The figure of speech used here is called hyperbole. It is a way of speaking or writing that makes something sound better, more exciting than it really is. Auditory image is also used in the first line. Auditory is related to hearing. The first line makes use of hearing. I heard 1,000 blended notes. Let's quickly understand what imagery is. Imagery is a language that helps create images or pictures in the reader's mind. We just saw an example of an auditory image. We have examples of visual images or imagery in the poem, like in the line, the birds around me hopped and played, the image of grove, the green bower, the flowers, periwinkle and primrose, and the example of the budding twigs. When the poet uses these words, it helps create visual images or images related to sight in our mind's eye. There is also a tactile imagery. Tactile means related to touch. There is also a tactile image that is used in the poem where the budding twigs try to catch or touch the breezy air. So that's it about imagery used in the poem. Another important figure of speech used in the poem is alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words that are close together. Let us take as example the first two lines of Carolyn Wells' Tongue Twister to illustrate this. Betty Botter bought a bit of butter, but she said, this butter's bitter. See how the sound "bar" gets repeated at the beginning of words in the same or nearby lines. Now let's return to our poem and look at the last line of the second stanza. What is the last line of the second stanza? What man has made of man. Which sound gets repeated here? Yes, the sound ma gets repeated 3 times. The third line of the third stanza also makes use of alliteration. The line, "And 'tis my faith that every flower." Fa sound gets repeated twice or 2 times in this line. The second stanza employs yet another figure of speech, and it's called as personification. Personification happens when you give human attributes to non-human things. Remember reading stories in your childhood where you saw trees, stones, birds, animals, etc., talking, crying, laughing, etc. That is personification. Here, in the second stanza of the poem, the poet has compared nature to a woman. The line, "To her fair works did nature link." In that line, nature is treated as a woman who can think and make decisions for herself. Personification is also used in the lines, "And 'tis my faith that every flower enjoys the air it breathes." Flowers breathing like humans. Personifications once more. Yet another example of personification can be seen in the lines, "The budding twigs spread out their fan to catch the breezy air." Trees behaving as if they are about to catch the breezy air. Again, a human behavior. Consonance is another figure of speech used in the poem. Consonance is a repetition of the same consonant sounds within a group of words. The repetition of consonant sounds can occur at the beginning, end, or middle of words. For example, In the line, I heard 1,000 blended notes, the sound "the" occurs 3 times at the end of words and once in the middle. In the third line of the first stanza, we find the sound "t" getting repeated itself at the end of words, like that, sweet, pleasant, and thought. In the lines, through primrose tufts in that green bower, the periwinkle trailed its wreaths, we see the "r" sound getting repeated. All these are examples of consonants. One thing you have to note here is that if alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words, consonance is the repetition of consonant sounds anywhere in a group of words. The last 2 lines of the poem makes use of the figure of speech known as a rhetorical question. A rhetorical question is asked for effect with no answer expected. The last 2 lines of the poem are in the form of a question. That's how the poet ends the poem. But it's a question where the poet does not expect an answer. So, what has man made of man? I leave that thought to you. See you in the next video.